Another important part of healthy relationships is consent. To introduce this topic, please enjoy the following video. So here are some questions for you. How do you know if someone wants to hold your hand and/or kiss you? If someone wants to hold your hand, does that mean they want to kiss you? If someone wants to kiss you, does that mean they will want to go further? If someone wants to hold your hand and/or kiss you one day, does that mean they will want to hold your hand and/or kiss you the next day? These questions are exactly why we teach about consent, because honestly, some people struggle with answering those. As we learned before, communication, respect, and honesty are the building blocks of healthy relationships, and consent is about all of those things. When we learn about consent, we also learn how to express what we do and do not want. So, what do you think when you hear the word consent? And how would you explain consent to someone who doesn't know what it is? In order to really understand what consent is, we first need to talk about boundaries. And there are 3 important things you need to know regarding personal boundaries. First of all, they are self-created, so everyone gets to decide what they're okay with and what they're not okay with. They also can change depending upon who they're with, what they're doing, or where they are. So think about the boundaries that you have for yourself at home versus at school. Are they different? Boundaries can also shift over time. So the boundaries you have for yourself as a high school student might change from the boundaries you have for yourself as a 25-year-old. So they do change over time. And lastly, they need to be respected. No one likes to be uneasy, embarrassed, humiliated, or hurt, which is what happens when our boundaries have been crossed without our permission. So to avoid making someone feel that way, they need to look for consent. Consent is a clear and enthusiastic yes. It's not a yes with a question mark or a maybe or no answer at all. It's a heck yes, I want to do that. It's clear that somebody is consenting or saying yes. It is an active, voluntary, and verbal agreement. It's a process and a conversation. That means checking in at all stages. And it can always be withdrawn. So if somebody consents to something 1 minute and then 2 minutes later, they can withdraw that consent and say, you know what, maybe I don't want to do this. And that has to be respected. Lastly, consent is activity specific. So with consent, everyone is clear about what is to happen next and is happy about it. So with each new activity, consent has to be granted. We also have free and informed consent. So someone is able to give their free and informed consent if they know what they are consenting to. They're able to choose whether or not to do something. They know what their feelings are about the particular situation and are able to communicate their choice without persuasion. And either a yes or a no is acceptable. And by the way, not refusing, so not saying anything, does not equal consent. They're also able to understand if something is harmful and are able to prevent being harmed physically or emotionally by another person. So everyone in the situation has to feel free to be able to say no without being pressured or hassled. Now, with consent, it is everyone's responsibility to ensure they have their partner's consent before and during intimacy, because remember, it's activity specific. So contact with another person's body, whether sexual or not, must always include consent. So no one should be touching another person without their consent. So let's take you through an everyday example. What if Terry wants to read his best friend Sam's diary? Why should Terry ask Sam? Terry should ask Sam because it's Sam's diary and she gets to set her own boundary. Remember, boundaries are self-created. Terry can ask, but getting consent needs to be an active process between him and Sam. If Sam gives Terry consent to read her diary, can Terry also share it with his other friends? No. Remember, consent is activity specific. So Sam might be okay with sharing her diary with Terry, but not with his friends. That needs to be a separate conversation. What if Sam changes her mind and asks Terry to stop reading her diary and return it to her? Terry should stop and return it. Boundaries can change and consent can be taken back at any time. Terry doesn't have to understand why Sam changed her mind either to treat her well and respect her boundaries. Should Terry ask Sam about reading her diary while she's sleeping and take her snoring as a yes? No! If Sam's not actively listening and hearing what Terry's asking permission for, she can't give consent in a free and clear mindset. Is it okay for Terry to beg, pressure, threaten, or make Sam feel guilty if she doesn't want to let him read her diary? No! Consent must be given in a free and clear mindset. It's not fair for Terry to disrespect Sam by making her feel bad about setting her own boundaries. Alright, so hopefully that helps you understand what exactly consent is. Let's see this applied to an everyday life. In the video you just watched, you can see what a dialogue that includes affirmative consent looks like. Here are some more examples. So you can use these in situations that you need to get consent for something. For example, you could say, "I'd really like to blank with you. Would you like to? Do you like it when I do this? Before we go any further, do you want to do this?" So overall, affirmative consent dialogues revolve around effectively communicating the type and degree of physical activity partners are willing to engage in with clear and verbal phrases. So don't just guess, receive a yes. What affirmative consent does not look like, or behaviors that fundamentally violate one's right to give consent, include refusing to stop or respect the word no, using fear or intimidation to pressure someone into sexual activity, assuming consent was given because a person is flirting, kissing, or dressed in a certain way, or interacting sexually either with or as someone under the legal age of consent as defined by law. In Minnesota, the legal age of consent is 16 years old, but I looked this law up and there is more to the law than just that. So in Minnesota, if a child is under the age of 13, it is always considered statutory rape, regardless of the age of the perpetrator. If the person is under the age of consent is between 13 and 16 years old, they can legally consent to sex with someone that is less than 48 months or 4 years older than them. So somebody who is 13 years old can consent to have sex with someone who is 17 years old, or someone who is 15 can consent to have sex with someone who is 19 because they are less than 4 years older or 48 months than them. Other behaviors that fundamentally violate one's right to give consent include being incapacitated by or under the influence of drugs or alcohol, assuming consent from a former partner remains because the person previously consented to sexually interact with them in the past, and assuming permission to engage in a sexual act was granted because the person has engaged in sexual acts with other people before. So let's review. How do you know when someone gives their consent to hold hands, hug, kiss, or touch them? Do we always need to use words to give consent? What do you do if consent is unclear? What are some tools you can use to be 100% sure that you have another person's consent? If you get someone's consent once, do you have to get it again later? Is consent a one-time event or an ongoing conversation? Why? Why is consent an important part of all our relationships? What are examples of using consent with people you are dating? How about people in your family? Your friends? So I hope this helps you understand better what consent actually is and why it's an important part of our relationships. However, if you're still struggling with this concept, I have one more video that I think makes it very simple.